Hi everyone, I'm Dr.Animaction. Welcome to the first revised episode of the Doctor's Deep Dives. I realize that the past couple of episodes really weren't that deep, and I'm not terribly interested in making videos that tell you all there is to tell you is nothing. That being that, from now on the deep dives will include that behind-the-scenes information that I can collect like I've done in the past, but also a much more in-depth look at the story aspects of each series as well, looking closely at the characters, settings, themes, and world building of the show. That way these videos will have something interesting for me to cover, even if the show I'm talking about doesn't, from a background perspective. After this video, I'm going straight to work on the next Squad Showdown, so make sure to keep an eye out for that one. For now though, let's take a look at a not very well remembered show that came out of Canada in the late 90s, Shadow Raiders, or War Planets, Shadow Raiders. I guess it depends on where you watched it. More on that later though. War Planets is a show about a number of planets that are at war. Easy enough. If you want more details though, I guess we can talk about some. War Planets was actually a series of miniature playsets released by Trendmasters in 1997. The line consisted of several toys made up of battle moons and supermoons, the planets themselves, which each included some unnamed minifigures, some vehicles representing the population of each, and a deluxe beast planet. Planets also came with cards listing the alignment, either good or evil, stats, and a bit of background about each, laying out the basic structure of the story in enough detail to get the imagination started. Here's where Mainframe Entertainment came in, chosen to produce an animated series in support of the toy line. Mainframe was riding high at the time with their other success stories, Reboot and Beast Wars Transformers. They were given the task of taking the outline provided by the toys and turning that into an actual series, with an episode-by-episode continuous storyline, which they'd already been doing with those other series. They took up the challenge and got to work producing the War Planets CGI cartoon. Or they would have if the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission hadn't released regulatory bans on the use of the word war in the titles of children's shows. Rather than being dissuaded though, the producers simply changed the name of the series, and by extension the toy line, to Shadow Raiders. That's how it was released in its home country of Canada, and simultaneously in other places like the UK. But here in America, where we love violence and only really hate nudity, it was called War Planets, Shadow Raiders, combining both the old and new titles. Taking the outline of the story though, Mainframe started to run with it and develop an actual series kids could follow. Mainframe realized right away that keeping the focus space-based on planets wouldn't allow for much creativity, so the decision was obviously made to focus on the inhabitants of those planets instead. As for the planets themselves, they were created in the toy line as inhabiting the same solar system, called the Cluster, where they were both at constant war and dependent on each other for the resources they needed to survive. The Cluster was occupied by 5 planets, descriptively named Rock Planet, Bone Planet, Fire Planet, and Ice Planet, the 5th being the dead planet Remora, apparently named after the scavenger fish that follow sharks around, which is uninhabited and produces no resources. As for the others, the Fire Planet produces energy, Bone produces food, Rock minerals, and Ice water. It definitely seems like a joke of evolution that none of the planets produced all of the resources needed to sustain the life that developed on those planets, but that's just how it is. So like I mentioned, they all depend on each other to continue to survive, and ironically they're all constantly at war. The series opens outside of the Cluster with a huge planet splitting open and consuming a smaller one, which we find is inhabited by techno-organic looking people. Some of these people flee, resulting in a space battle that feels straight out of Battlestar Galactica. This leads to things getting even more complicated in the Cluster though, because on that day, Tekla, Princess of Planet Tech, and her robot Vox arrive to warn the inhabitants of the oncoming Beast Planet, which is what destroyed her home just minutes ago. We're actually introduced to the conflict between the planets of the Cluster here by being shown that several rock miners have been killed by being frozen solid by ice soldiers as they're mining ice on the Ice Planet. Ice. That's a lot of ice. The Beast drones arrive and handily defeat the forces of ice and rock as they face off with each other, leaving only a couple of survivors in a scene that's way more violent than you'd reasonably expect from a 90s cartoon. These survivors consist of Tekla, who was rescued by a miner named Graveheart, and the Ice King Cryos. The 3 of them are able to defeat the Beast drones, but not before Graveheart's wounded and Tekla is quote-unquote killed, or at least momentarily knocked offline. Cryos takes the injured back to his home city, heals Graveheart in some kind of a Bacta-tank, and repairs Tekla with the help of nanotechnology, after which Ice becomes the first planet to join an alliance that they're trying to create against the Beast. All that in just the first episode, so talk about hitting the ground running. The next episode sees Cryos and Graveheart traveling to planet Rock to recruit them into the newly formed alliance as well. The rock ruler, Lord Mantle, is, unironically, stubborn as a rock, and as Rock's battle moons repel an attack by the beast drones, he's secure in his planet's strength and superiority, refusing to seek an alliance with the rest of the cluster. This refusal makes Graveheart, Tekla, and their supporters something of a rebellion, and Graveheart becomes their de facto leader. His old friend Jade, who's captain of the rock planet's royal guards, leaves her post to join the rebellion and takes off from the rock planet with them to find other allies. In rapid succession following this, Bone and Fire both join the alliance. Season 1 concludes with them tracking the beast drones to planet Remora, only to find them converting the husk to a fortress from which to launch strikes at the rest of the cluster. The Alliance attacks Remora in an attempt to keep the beast planet from gaining a foothold, but almost lose that battle before the unexpected arrival of Rock's battle moons tip the scale in their favor. The beast planet's not too happy about this intervention, though, and as it ominously flies out of the cluster's star, fires a single energy blast that vaporizes one of the battle moons in an instant. After this show of force, it turns its attention to the nearby fire planet and, well, I won't be recapping every episode, as you should give it all a watch, but I wanted to provide an introduction to whet your appetite and set your expectations. Most of this first season is building the Alliance and staying one step ahead of Beast. As for the second season, remember what I said about a cruel joke of evolution? Well, it turns out evolution didn't have much to do with things, as each planet discovers it's equipped with giant thrusters called world engines, suggesting intelligent design over nature. These world engines allow each planet to travel at very high speeds through space while simultaneously generating force fields to protect the occupants. This allows the planets of the cluster to begin an intergalactic game of cat and mouse as they flee the beast planet in a desperate bid for survival. The controls for the world engines exist at the core of each planet and are accompanied by telepods, which allow instantaneous transport between the 4 main cluster worlds. This season involves not only this ongoing evasion, but also plenty of infighting, backstabbing, power plays, hubris, death, and destruction. It's pretty awesome, actually, with a great ongoing story and some very mature storytelling for a show of the type. But if you've seen Beast Wars, then you can probably picture what's in store for you here, at least somewhat. There's a ton going on, with several new significant characters being introduced and fleshed out, as well as some named representatives of Beast and a triumvirate of baddies and new races outside the cluster worlds with their own agendas. Between the political intrigue, the stories of personal loss and sacrifice, the desperation of the background characters, and the good and bad sides of, for lack of a better term, human nature on display, it's way better than the animation and its role as a toy supporting cartoon would leave you to believe. As for the third season, that one tells the story of the epic battle and final showdown between the worlds of the cluster and the beast planet, or at least it would have if the toy sales hadn't declined far enough to lead to the series cancellation, making the third season an exercise in what could have been. In addition to the overall world building of the cluster and its history, the character design is actually another strength of the series. Each of the 4 main races of stone, ice, bone, and fire is unique and easy to differentiate. The designs are fitting for the environment each represents, except maybe for the ice locusts, but that's a minor quip. The rock people look like various types of rocks and minerals. The characters of fire look like they emit heat and are constantly in motion, even if they seem to incorporate elements of rock in their design as well, which could have been a cool element to explore. And the bone inhabitants are diverse and odd-looking reptilian people, fitting their organic role in nature. Even the triumvirate of beast rulers are interesting and intimidating. From its humble origins as a line of miniature playsets, the series turned into something with a very unique identity all its own. Main characters are easily distinguishable from each other, and their roots are readily apparent. Their technologies fit the character designs, and their roles in the story are clearly defined. By the time Graveheart has assembled the full alliance, its core roster is a nearly equally balanced mix of representatives from each, including Tekla, Cryos from Ice, Prince Pyrrhus of Fire, Emperor Femur of Bone, and eventually representatives of the new planets they discover as they travel the galaxy, including Sand and Jungle. Each stands in stark contrast to their enemies, the beast forces of Block, Lamprey, and Void, who fit no clear mold or category. Sure, the nature of the CGI animation may leave something to be desired in each character's representation, but it's easy to see the quality of the designs underneath. Back at the beginning of this video, I referred to the series by a few different names, specifically War Planets, Shadow Raiders, and Shadow Raiders War Planets, and each of those is accurate. The series was born as the aforementioned Trendmaster's toy line War Planets, but upon adaptation as a cartoon, Mainframe found that the name wouldn't fly. I can't find the actual public notice of the regulation, but at that time there was a restriction on several aspects of violence in children's television programming, including the use of the word war. In order to get the series on the air, they changed the name and at the same time rebranded the toys as Shadow Raiders. As I mentioned earlier in the video, that name was used everywhere else around the world the show was released. With an acceptable name and a studio whose pedigree was already in place from Reboot and Beast Wars, Mainframe Entertainment began to put the show together. Trendmasters had obviously already done the design work on the planets, or as much of it as there was on the relatively small-scale toy sets, and also had a general idea of what those planets' inhabitants would look like in the form of the included minifigures. Mainframe fleshed out those designs and did so in a way that facilitated easy modeling for the computer animators. Of course, we're talking about 90s CGI, so the visuals in the series itself don't necessarily do those designs justice, but it's great for what the creators were working with at the time. The relatively awesome music for the series, which starts with some Gregorian chanting similar to the Halo theme, was done by Mainframe regular Robert Buckley, the composer responsible for Beast Wars and Beast Machines, and Reboot as well. There are a couple of names in the list of writers that jump out, starting with Christy Marks, who's credited with 8 episodes, more than any other writer on the series. She's best known as the writer of Jem and the Holograms, both the original series and the more recent live-action movie. The next highest number of episodes were written by Ken Pontac, main writer on Happy Tree Friends. We also have a single episode coming from Steve Kuden, writer of RoboCop Alpha Commando. The most surprising names to see on the writers list are the single episode, which was actually the premiere episode called Behold the Beast, written by Len Wein, who was a prolific comic writer who co-created characters like Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, and Swamp Thing, as well as being the editor for the original Watchmen comic series. Finally, though, sticking with the comic book pedigree, we got 3 episodes, numbers 3 and 10 from the first season, titled Born in Fire and Against All Odds respectively, and episode 12 from the second season, titled The Long Road Home, from Marv Wolfman. If you don't know Marv Wolfman, then you must not be a comics fan, because he's the guy who co-created most of the Teen Titans, like Raven and Cyborg, Deathstroke, and the guy who turned Dick Grayson into Nightwing, and co-created his Robin replacement, Tim Drake. I know Jason Todd was the actual replacement for Dick Grayson, but, well, you know. He also co-created Bullseye, Blade, and one of my favorite characters, Nova, for Marvel. Maybe most importantly in the world of comics, he was also the writer of both DC's New Teen Titans and Crisis on Infinite Earths, which reset the company's entire continuity. Shifting focus, there are also a couple of well-known names in the voice cast, though surprisingly for cartoons from this time, none that I've mentioned in any previous videos, which means no Frank Welker and no Peter Cullen. Graveheart was voiced by Paul Dobson, who has a huge list of credits in US anime dubs, including Naraku from Inuyasha, Anubis and Ronin Warriors, and several different voices in series like Ranma and various Dragon Balls, and also has a just as large list of North American productions. Fire Prince Pyrus was Transformer Energon's Ironhide, Gundam Seed's Kira Yamato, Cardcaptor Sakura's Kero, and Captain Freaking N the Game Master, plus so many others, Matt Hill. Gary Chalk, the voice of Beast Wars Optimal Primus,
strike that, reverse it. This way, please!
Played Emperor Femur from the Bone Planet. Jade was voiced by Gundam's Lady Yoon, Enuka Okuma, who was possibly better known as a primarily live-action actor from series like Nightman and Rookie Blue. Scott McNeil, voice of Beast Wars Raptrap, Dinobot, Silverbolt, Waspinator, others. Energon's Jetfire and Omega Supreme, 2 of the greatest Transformers ever created, Beastman and Stratos from the 2000s remake of He-Man, and about a billion other roles, voiced bad guy Block and Bone Planet upstart Pelvis. Oh, and he was also Piccolo throughout the Dragon Ball series. We've also got the actor I know best as Joe Dawson from various Highlander projects, including 97 episodes of the TV series, Jim Burns as the Grand Vizier, and several others with fairly impressive CVs of their own. This topic could go on for a while, but I'll spare you and we can move on. Specifically, we'll move on to take a look at the reach of the series. As I mentioned toward the beginning, War Planet started life as a fairly robust toy line consisting of several planet playsets, a deluxe Beast Planet playset that could open up and eat the smaller ones, and some tiny battle moons. The animated series was released in support of this line, but more surprisingly, it also got a tie-in PC game, also released in 1997, called War Planet's Age of Chaos. This was an RTS game that allowed you to play as one of the 4 original main planets in a StarCraft-esque interplanetary confrontation. Maybe I'll have to grab the ROM and do a playthrough on the channel. Let me know if you'd all be into that. Beyond the toys, game, and cartoon though, there wasn't much in the way of tie-in merchandise. Once the show got rolling and the toy line rebranded to the Shadow Raiders name, it did get several more playsets, as well as a line of figures and some vehicles based on the cartoon designs. It was the declining sales of the toy line which gave birth to the series, though, that eventually killed it, and prevented us from getting any closure in the battle against the Beast Planet. That's an absolute shame for a story this strong and this well developed, since the property has no legacy to speak of, with no comics or books or anything like that to pick up where the show left off. And there you go, a newly formatted deep dive taking a look at a short-lived and underrated series from the late 1990s. This is one that I would have loved to see some resolution for, as it was a really well done story and fun to watch. Mainframe Entertainment in general doesn't get enough love for the contributions it made to animation during the decade in the early 2000s, as most everything they released, including the series I've already mentioned, plus Action Man, Max Steel, Heavy Gear, and Spider-Man the new animated series, are all worth a watch. Anyway, what are your thoughts on War Planets, or Shadow Raiders, or whatever you want to call it? Let me know those and your thoughts on this expanded deep dive format in the comments below. Also, if you want to like and share this video, I'd definitely appreciate that. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay tuned, and stay tuned, as in cartoons. Later.